Hey, what's going on, Dodgers Nation? Doug McCain here. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMac_LA. Now, if you haven't yet, do us a huge favor and subscribe to the Dodgers Nation YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, hit that like button. Also, one, be subscribed to the channel, and two, comment GOAT Tani down below in the comment section so you're eligible for our next giveaway at 95,000 subscribers. We are giving away a road gray Shohei Ohtani Dodgers jersey. So if you want to be eligible, be sure to subscribe and make sure you comment down below. Now, in a few moments, we're going to be joined by Andy McCullough. You, of course, know Andy from covering the Dodgers for the LA Times for 6 years. He's currently with The Athletic. He's one of the best baseball writers on the planet, and he's going to be joining us to talk about his new book, The Last of His Kind, Clayton Kershaw and the Burden of Greatness. But before that, we got an update on Clayton Kershaw. Now, the three-time Cy Young Award winner is currently rehabbing after undergoing surgery on his left shoulder in the offseason. And one of the big questions was, how would Kersh respond after his first major surgery? And so far, the answer is very well. Now, the expectation was that he would return to the mound following the All-Star break, and that's still where we stand. And he checked off another big box this week. He threw his second bullpen session. He threw 20 pitches. The organization feels like he's progressing well. They're encouraged with his rehab. He's still months away, but you're seeing big progress from Kersh. The fact that you're not having any setbacks, he's throwing bullpen sessions now. So I still feel like the path to him getting back on the mound is on the right track. I think we're definitely going to see him back for the Dodgers at some point late in the summertime after the All-Star break. And depending on how healthy this rotation can stay, we'll see if he does carve out a role for this team. Because if all these guys stay healthy, it makes you wonder who'll be a part of this rotation when October rolls around. We know that Glasnow and Yamamoto, they're locks. We'll see how Walker Buehler performs and how well Bobby Miller looks when he comes back. So lots of questions with this rotation, but there's a lot of reinforcements that could be on the way during the summer months, and Clayton Kershaw is absolutely progressing well, and the organization feels really good about where he's at. But without further ado, we're going to be joined by Andy McCullough to talk about his new book about Clayton Kershaw. That's coming up next here on Dodgers Dugout.
It's time for Dodger baseball.
First Dodger home run.
Welcome to Dodger Stadium.
Dodgers win.
This is the golden age of Dodger baseball.
Grand slam.
It's a double for Freddie.
Monkey magic.
They're going to make big signings. They're going to make impact trades. This is the most anticipated season in Dodgers history.
Dodgers have won it all in 2020.
Think blue, bleed blue, and I'm out. What is up, Dodgers Nation? Doug McCain here, and today we got a special guest, Mr. Andy McCullough. And first and foremost, Andy, it's got to congratulate you. I'm just going to say it right away. This is a masterpiece. And for any Dodgers fan out there, any baseball fan out there, this is required reading. You can get it wherever you get your books, Amazon. You get the Kindle version, you get the Audible, you get any version. But I don't care what you got to do. You got to read this book. It's just a fantastic read. And for us Clayton Kershaw fans, for us Dodgers fans, just so many new insights in this. I can't wait to get into it.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you said it all. I'll see everyone later. What else is there to say? No.
That's pretty much it. I mean, thanks for joining us. Just go to the book. That's all you got to know.
No, yeah, that's very kind of you to say. Yeah, it's cool to see people, getting a chance to read it.
Well, I think with Clayton Kershaw, there's so much mystery, so much mystique behind him. And I think what really stood out to me just the beginning of the book, just kind of how his upbringing and just his mom and his relationship with his dad and him being in Highland Park and this really, you think it's called like the Beverly Hills almost like, and how it's just this enclosed private community and how that kind of impacted him. But he wasn't this rich guy like a lot of his classmates and his teammates were. Just kind of how do you think that time period of his life just had a lasting impact on his career, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways it affected him. I think, like everyone, he carries portions of his childhood with him. I mean, I think the simplest way to draw the line is just look at the way that he parents, think about the way that he always is talking about his family, about the effort that he puts into seeing his children, when they're in Texas during the season and he's in LA, flying home on off days, setting an alarm at 4 a.m. so he can, wake up in time to call his daughter before she goes to school and things like that. And, I think there's a direct correlation between that and the way that he grew up at a time, when his father wasn't particularly present in his life after, he was about 10, when, he felt financial pressure from a very young age. His mother was basically had to work very hard and borrow money to keep the family, within the district of Highland Park, which is kind of this cutout in the middle of Dallas. That's, a far wealthier area than, a lot of other portions of Dallas. And so, yeah, I think there's lots of ways. He also, benefited from the community in Highland Park, from he met his, future wife, Ellen Nelson. Now her name's Ellen Kershaw because they got married. He met her when they were, before freshman year actually of high school, and they started dating, when they were freshmen, and they've been together, for I think even more than 20 years at this point. And he, benefited from the community of friends who, as their parents cooked meals for him and stuff when his mom was working, and, all those sorts of things. And so it's, there's a lot in there. And I think also too, you look at who he was as a pitcher and his sort of obsession with time and control and his need to kind of not let others dictate his schedule and things like that. And I think there's a real direct correlation there between him, having that as a grown up and being a kid who was waiting for his dad to, pick him up, to take him to practice. And he wasn't sure when his dad was going to get there, to being a kid who, would beg his mom to take him to baseball games 2 or 3 hours early. So he knew he would be on time. And it's the sort of thing that when he became, as he got older, as his career was more advanced, he tried harder and harder to sort of control time, to be able to master it to a sense. And so, yeah, there's a lot in there that relates to that, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that really sticks out is this time thing and just always being on time and being conscious of every single second, every minute. He talked about his parents and being late. He always wanted to be at practice 2 hours, 3 hours early. I remember doing an interview with Clayton Kershaw, and I asked him for 1 minute, and then it was close to a minute. I said, "Can I get one more question?" And he goes, "No, that's a minute." Sure enough, I pressed stop recording. It's at 60 seconds. Did you have any kind of stories like that when you're writing this book, or was you just kind of all open and just giving you all the access?
We did. We talked a lot over the course of the past couple of years. We started. I really sat down with him to do the bulk of our talks in the winter of 2022, and so that was a bit more open ended. And then we met, several times at a few different places in 2023 to sort of, fill in some of the gaps and talk about, the ongoing season and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, being a beat writer, when, I covered the Dodgers for several years for the LA Times. And so, you would talk to him and you would be maybe 3 minutes into a conversation and he would just walk away. And it was because he had somewhere else to be, and it would just be sort of he would answer your question. And as he was answering it, he just starts drifting in the other direction. You're like, oh, I guess that's over, because he's polite, he's not super rude about it. It's a very weird thing because it's not like he's sneering. It's not like he's, sort of trying to be a jerk. It's just I have elsewhere to be, and I am not going to prevent you from being there. And so, yeah, the experience you had is very common, I think, for folks who've dealt with him in that specific setting.
Yeah, I love the story you bring up with Samuel L. Jackson and just not having time for that. And it doesn't matter who it is, how big the celebrity is. If it's his start date, it's his start date. You mentioned the stories about him resting in the training room and the protein bar. And how about Kike Hernandez's Snapchat going off and him freaking out about that? Were his teammates just always okay, it's start day, you don't mess with Kersh, and everyone respected it? Or was it a situation where, okay, this guy's taking a little too serious, or just because of his greatness, you kind of just have to embrace it, right?
No, it was definitely a thing that I don't know if they embraced, but it wasn't a thing that they made fun of him for or, thought was taking too far. I think one of the things that's so interesting is if you talk to, a lot of times in doing this book, I would ask, these kind of open questions, just hey, what was it like playing with him? To ask teammates, what was it like? And the first thing that almost everyone says is just how intense the environment in the room was on the day he pitched. And like being around baseball, they play a lot of games. And, it's like you walk into the clubhouse some days and it's like, who are we playing tonight? Who's pitching for the other team? Like, sometimes they just don't know, especially like for home games. But when Kershaw's on the mound, the players knew exactly what was going on because the environment felt differently. In part, it was kind of the visual that he cut. He's sitting there in full uniform at 1 p.m. wearing his spikes.
Jacket all the way up.
He's got this winter jacket zipped all the way to the top. You can hear him throwing a baseball against a brick wall often. He's sort of stomping around. He's not speaking to anyone, but they're all sort of terrified of making eye contact with him. They're terrified of sitting next to him, as he's sort of trying to muscle down the turkey sandwich he eats before every game and all that sort of stuff. And so, that was kind of why I built the first chapter kind of around that experience. And because I wanted to sort of connect the way that he made people feel, when they played with him okay, so like, why are you like this? How did you come to be this sort of person who behaves and so obsessed with time and control, in this manner? And you connect it back to his childhood. And I felt like that was a really good way to sort of explain, like, look, this is the presentation he's putting out there to the world. Here's how it relates to basically who he is as a person, and use that as a way kind of into the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the million things I really love about the book is you really just take yourself in those situations. I felt like I was Justin Turner eating that protein bar in the training room. How freaked out I would be. Of course, in the book, you point out how he had the protein bar and the Red Bull, and that was part of his routine. And Justin Turner goes in there one day and he wolfs down the protein bar, and then he's scrambling to find another protein bar. I could just feel that anxiety right there. And really, it's just the testament to his greatness. I mean, the routine, but just kind of rewinding into his younger days. I mean, and how the Dodgers really acquired him. And when you kind of just give the credit to how he ended up on the Dodgers, right? You got Ned Cleddy, you got Logan White. There's a lot of people who were involved. How do you kind of divide that credit for how he ended up on the Dodgers?
Well, I mean, I think, Logan White and his scouts, Calvin Jones was the area scout in Dallas at that time. And look, it's not like he was a diamond, in the rough. Going into his senior year, he was a top 35 prospect among high school players, right? He was like someone who was going to get drafted. He wasn't a first round pick, but he was someone who was going to get drafted. He made some adjustments in his delivery and really sort of unlocked some stuff. And he went from kind of being 3/4 to over the top, which really created a visual that was very difficult for hitters to deal with. And at that point, he basically, zoomed up the draft boards. And when the draft came around, he was the number one high school prospect in the country. And then it became a matter of, which scouting director was going to be essentially, you can describe it as brave, you can describe it as crazy, but which scouting director was going to be willing to stake that high of a pick on a high school pitcher, specifically a high school left-hander. And I tried to explain in the book that, like, the draft is an incredibly volatile enterprise, right? Like, it's not like the NFL draft. It's not like the NBA draft. There are very few sure things in baseball. The game just does not, function that linearly, however you say that word. Linearly. I'm going to ruin the podcast by just saying that over and over again. Anyway, and the most volatile entity is a high school pitcher. And the most volatile type of a high school pitcher is a lefty, because you just see, there's just less common. And so they have a, kind of necessary advantage. So anyway, all of that is to say that I tried as best I could to talk to, folks from the other 6 teams who passed over him before the Dodgers took him at 7th and get their explanation. Most of the folks were super generous with their time and explaining it and, just going through the rationale of, like, look, like, he's a high school lefty. He was awesome. We really liked him, but we thought a college arm was better. Or, in the case of the Tampa Bay Devil Rays at the time, they're like, we took Evan Longoria. That's the best draft pick we ever made. So I think there's some, teams that have more regret than others. But anyway, it was, Logan White he felt very confident in going after high-level high school talent, in part because the Dodgers usually picked in the later portion of the first round because they usually were a good team. And so he felt it was his mandate to try and get all-stars. And so he had to be a bit riskier. So yeah, but it was something that the entire scouting department signed off on and endorsed. But Logan understandably gets a lot of credit for being willing to stake such a big pick on such a risky sort of type of player.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book from 96 to 2000, they selected 12 high school pitchers there right at the top, and only 9 of them never made the major league. So it's just not a normal thing to say, okay, we're going to go all in on this high school pitcher. I found it very interesting, the Boris angle, how they felt that the higher bonuses were going to go to the college pitchers and kind of that whole dynamic. But this kind of all traces back to Kersh feeling like, okay, I'm not going to go to Texas A&M. I'm not going to go to Oklahoma State. I'm going right to the majors because I got to help my mom out. I've got to pay back some debts. Kind of just talk about the link to him and his mom and then how that kind of accelerated his rise to professional baseball.
Yeah, well, it's kind of well known that he signed with Texas A&M. In part, Ellen and the rest of the Melson family they're Aggies, and so Ellen was going to go to Texas A&M, and Kershaw was like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. They play in the Big 12, and so he got a full scholarship offer from them, and he was gonna room with Zach Britton, actually, who also ended up getting drafted. But he was basically, when we were talking through it, he was like, you know what, man, like, if I got drafted, like, I was going to sign. And if I didn't get a good enough bonus, I was going to go to JUCO for a year and then go back into the draft, because he just did not feel like he and his mom could afford to pay, even on a full ride. They could afford to, wait 3 years in order to, get him to start sort of earning and so it ended up being kind of a non-issue, because he got so good that there was just no way he was not going to, go pro, because the money was just going to be so significant. But I did think it was interesting finding out that, like, his mindset going into that year was not like, all right, if I'm there's some families, like, for example, Sean Tollison's in the book. Sean and Kershaw they're very good friends. They've been good friends for quite some time. Tollison played briefly for the Dodgers, and he came from a more affluent family, and his parents basically told him, like, if you're a first round pick, we'll let you, go pro. Otherwise, you're going to college. And so that was his goal. Kershaw didn't have that sort of binary. It was like, if I get drafted, I'm probably going to get signed no matter what.
Yeah. And you look at his rise, and you made it known in the book that Ned Clayton says, you know what, we're going to fast track him to the big leagues. And he finally gets that opportunity, has his ups and downs. And at the time, of course, the Dodgers manager was Joe Torre. You talk about the relationship between Kersh and Torre and just how big of an impact, positive or negative, he had in the early stages of Kershaw's development.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an odd relationship, because they're not odd, but it's just like there's such a significant gap in age and experience. Joe Torre's coming to the Dodgers having won 4 championships, with the Yankees. He's going into the Hall of Fame. He's on this is clearly going to be his final stop. And so, he has so much sort of wisdom and, insight, but also, Kershaw's a 20-year-old kid talking to a significantly older fellow. And so I do think, Torre did some things that were really useful for Kershaw in terms of, one, he helped connect him with Sandy Koufax, and sort of facilitated that relationship a bit. He also was very supportive of Kershaw during kind of a rough patches in like 2008 and 2009, where the team was considering sending him down. He believed that it was probably best for him to continue learning at the majors. He said that Torre told me that Kershaw in some ways reminded him of like Derek Jeter or Robinson Cano, like younger players who were too good for the minors and just had to be allowed to, sort of go through development in the big leagues. And probably the most important thing that Torre did was he sort of convened this meeting in the beginning in like May of 2009, when Kershaw's second season, when he's really struggling, and not really struggling, but he's got like a 4.5 ERA. He's not finishing at bats. He's got this great fastball and this big curveball, but he's just not, being efficient. And Torre asked Don Mattingly, who was the hitting coach at the time, to sort of provide a scouting report on him. And Mattingly kind of gives this devastating, report of just like, he's a one-pitch pitcher. Like, I would never swing at the curveball ever. Like, I would just sit fastballs in and just crush him, basically. And he also, sort of empowered Rick Honeycutt to talk to Kershaw about adding a third pitch, which led to Kershaw adding the slider. which has become his best pitch. It's the reason he's going to the Hall of Fame, and the combination of the fastball and slider is, what really unlocked the door for him and took him from a guy who was like a talented prospect who's kind of scuffling at 20 and 21 to when he's 22 and 23, he's already becoming the best pitcher in the sport.
Yeah, that's what I love about this book, too, is it really shows that Kersh has had that stubborn side to him. You mentioned the development of that slider, and they made it very clear. Rick Honeycutt, okay, we got to add that third pitch. We have to. They're trying to say, okay, lefties, they have to throw changeups, but with the way the pronating, it just didn't really work out for Kersh. And then in come Mike Borzello at Wrigley Field. And just how did that all come about? Just the development of that slider.
Yeah. Mike Borzello is very much, he's like a Zelig-like figure in baseball history. I believe he's scouting for the Padres now, but at different stops in his career. Like Borzello, for example, he was a coach on the Cubs when they won the World Series in 2016. He happened to be the bullpen catcher for the Yankees on the night in, I believe it was 1997, when Mariano Rivera's fastball just started cutting. Rivera no one really knows why Rivera's fastball just started cutting, but the night that it first happened, Borzello was catching, and Borzello also was, there catching when Kershaw first sort of unveiled the slider. And so Kershaw had talked to Rick Honeycutt a bit about, some things with the grip. Honeycutt passed along a grip that he had learned from Mel Stottlemyre. He also, was talking to him with a concept about something called hooking the seam that he had learned from Sandy Koufax that, involves sort of creating like a vice-like grip with your knuckles that increases the spin. And so Kershaw, grabs Borzello and says, hey, I want to try and, try out this pitch, essentially. And they go out, I believe it was down the right field line where the bullpens used to be in Wrigley Field, and Kershaw throws it, and it just sort of like disappears. And his slider has an uncommon sort of profile to it. It has more downward break, and it almost looks more like a splitter in some ways, and it moves later. And Borzello was just sort of like, this is like outrageous, and he throws it a few times and he's like, that's game ready. And Kershaw's like, no, it's not, whatever. And so I guess a couple days later, maybe a day later, AJ Ellis happened to be up from the minors. This is really before Ellis and Kershaw became particularly close, but he's up from the minors, and he has Ellis, come out to catch a bullpen, and Kershaw throws the slider, and Ellis is like, he should be using that in games. And he debuted it, I think, in his next start, and it, emerged as really like his primary off-speed pitch. I think obviously the general perception from the public is like, oh, Clayton Kershaw, a huge curveball. And it's like, the curveball is not his thing. Like it's a very aesthetically pleasing pitch, but he's fastball and sliders, glove side down. Like that's what he's done for basically, 15 years now. And that's, kind of the genesis of that pitch.
Yeah, I love how you point that out. And if you really want to nerd out, this is a great book to do it. I mean, you mentioned Honeycutt and Koufax talking about the pressure points and how that kind of led to the slider. And you mentioned it too. That's what really makes Clayton Kershaw a GOAT. One of the best pitchers ever is finding that slider, but also when he reinvented himself after the velocity dip, he throws that slider more in the fastball and is able to continue on his career at an all-star level. But one of my favorite chapters of the whole book was the shadow of Sanford, right? The Sandy Koufax and the Clayton Kershaw chapter. And it's almost see some similarities with Borzello and with Koufax and Norm Sherry giving him the advice about just letting the hitter hit it. It feels like these people are there, they're like sent from the baseball gods to give these guys tips to just unlock their careers. Just kind of talk about the relationship between Clayton Kershaw and Sandy Koufax and how that really has impacted his career.
Yeah, Koufax was willing to talk to me for the book, which I think is, emblematic of how much affection he has for Kershaw. They're friends. They're people who, despite the difference in age, they talk on the phone. They, get together, maybe once or twice a year for dinner and things like that. And it's someone who I think, Kershaw understands sort of Koufax's importance to the franchise. But they connect in a way that I think there's very few people who can really understand what it is like to be Sandy Koufax or what it is like to be Clayton Kershaw, and they're like two of the few people on the planet who are able to sort of have that sort of like for lack of a better term, sort of like spiritual connection, right? And that they've just lived such similar lives, in terms of their professional responsibilities. And so, yeah, I mean, they've been, pretty close since like 2010 or so, I think.
And you kind of mentioned that every pitcher that's ever pitched for this organization lives in the shadow of Sandy Koufax. And I think anytime you hear them talking or you see them in the same room, you just kind of get goosebumps. And really, it's a really special relationship that I think both of them honor. It feels like Kersh has totally embraced really his role. And yeah, the similarities, the lefties, the curveballs, but really different pitchers at the end of the day. But really kind of want to fast forward to kind of one of the biggest talking points when it comes to Clayton Kershaw. We know the regular season greatness. The lowest ERA in the live ball era, 3-time Cy Young Award winner, an MVP winner. There's no doubt about it. He has a seat at the table with the all-time greats. But really, it's the postseason narrative, right? The ups, the downs, the good starts, the bad starts, the Cardinals series, the Astros series with the cheating. It's just such a complicated postseason resume, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's, that's one of the things that the book tries to untangle. The book's not meant to be like a, defense of his postseason performance or an absolution or trying to make excuses. It's certainly not something that he's interested in. But yeah, the numbers are what they are, right? Like he has a 2.48 ERA in the regular season and a 4.49 in the postseason. There's a significant gap. I would also note that a 4.49, if you go 6 innings and give up 3 runs, you're credited with a quality start, and your ERA is 4.5. So he's judged, but to a different standard than the overwhelming majority of people in the sport. He's judged basically to a singular standard, but guess what? He's earned it. That's because he's the best. No one cares if, no offense, like if Blake Snell blows up in the postseason, because Blake Snell was not judged to that standard. He's a great player, but he's not judged to this standard. Kershaw is a historically important player, and I think that's why there's so much attention paid to the postseason. And so getting into the explanations, I think it's the sort of thing that changes over time, as you go through. Definitely with the Cardinals in 13 and 14, there was probably some obstinance on his part, and maybe he became too predictable in his sequencing. Those games maybe might have been called a bit better. It's something that A.J. Ellis, who was behind the plate, still harbors a lot of real regret about specifically how some things went in 2014. But then as you go through, it's like 2015 is pretty good. 2016 he's coming off a major back injury and is pitching on short rest and is just completely gassed by the time the Cubs, sort of club him around after he put together several really good starts before that. 17, we also all know what happened there, with the Astros. And then by 18 and 19, he's just at a point physically where he is not remotely the same player he had been 5 years before. And so it's the sort of thing that, reputations, once they are fixed, are hard to shake off. I thought that the way he pitched in 2020 would change a lot of that, because he was pretty good in the postseason. He pitched great in the World Series, all that sort of stuff. But then, he just pitching with a basically destroyed shoulder last October. He's, got just basically bludgeoned by the Diamondbacks, and on the national broadcast, Bob Costas is, doing the narrative stuff again. And you're just like, okay, well, I guess he wasn't absolved. And, reputations, once they become fixed, they're hard to shake off. But, the book tries to explain what happened and why, and there's not a ton of connective tissue, I think, after those first few years where, there might have been some explanation. It's hard to untangle in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that they just have such a fantastic job in just presenting the good, the bad, and the ugly as far as the postseason starts and the nightmares. And yeah, I definitely relived some nightmares reading some of these chapters, but I also learned more stuff too. And I think for me, you go to the Cardinals series, as you pointed out, Kersh is a guy who fares better in the third time through the order than the second time through the order. And one thing that really just stood out to me was just how different the game of baseball is in 2024 than just 2013 and 2014. In no way, even if it's your ace in a 6-1 game, you're over 100 pitches, are you going to stay out there and they're going to leave you out there to die?
Zero chance. Yeah, that's the thing, right? And especially you look at 13 and 14. If those games are played in 2023 and 2024, it's not a thing. Like, no one's ever discussed anything related to Clayton Kershaw's postseason.
Exactly.
They talk about him the way they talk about Steven Strasburg, where it's like, wow, Steven Strasburg was nails in the postseason. It's like, yeah, he was going 6 innings. and he was great. But, Kershaw was held to a different standard, a standard that he had earned with his performance. And at the time, I tried to really, I talked to like Don Mattingly, to, Tim Wallach, to Rick Honeycutt, to the folks who were making the decisions in real time in those games, against the Cardinals. And what they said just over and over is like, we would talk about it and say, who is better? Who is better, a tired Clayton Kershaw or a fresh reliever? And the answer, unless it was the ninth inning and it was Kenley Jansen, and even then, Kenley Jansen then was not the Kenley Jansen he became a few years later. Even then, the answer was almost always Clayton Kershaw. And it's different now. Teams are built differently. Bullpens are so much better than they were 10 years ago. And so I think that's you can see, I think when people are reading some of it, they're like, wait a minute, on short rest against the Braves in the first round, he threw 124 pitches. And it's like, or whatever. He threw 124 pitches and then came back on short rest, I believe. And it's like, wait, what? That's not a thing. And part of the reason it's not a thing anymore is because you saw what happened when the best of his generation tried to do it. And it's part of the reason why the game's changed.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's Lasorda in the dugout, or you got Koufax or Fernando on the mound with those pitch counts like they were. But also it's just, man, sometimes it's just so improbable. The Matt Adams home run, the first lefty to hit his curveball out, it's just so rare. And I can still hear Joe Buck in that game. Clayton Kershaw's making a statement only for that to happen. But as you mentioned, in this era, JP Howell's out there, right? And they're going to that bullpen. But one to jump to the most painful of chapters for me, of course, the 2017 World Series. And he was dominant in game one, goes 7 innings, gives up just the Bregman home run. He became the first pitcher since Don Newcomb to have a game where he had 11 strikeouts and no walks in the World Series. He was cruising. In game 5. We all know what happens next. They weren't offering at sliders. They were spitting on curveballs. And you point out in the book, 39 sliders, just one whiff. That's not normal. Question I want to ask you is, just talking to him, being around him, and kind of discussing this, how much do you think that series affects him? Do you think it still burns inside what happened in 2017?
I think that's over it in the sense that, like, I don't think he's going to be talking about it every day. But no, that's the one that I think still sticks with him the longest. I think that's the one that probably has done the most psychic damage to the Dodgers, in part because the experience of those 7 games was such an emotional sort of roller coaster. And then to come out the other side of it and find out, 2 years later that the Astros, may have been illegally stealing their signs, and could have swung the series, and to feel like you might have been cheated off this after this experience that was already so painful. I think it caused a lot of, psychic harm among the organization. I know Austin Barnes, for years, Austin Barnes could not understand how Jose Altuve hit the home run off Kenta Maeda, for example, in that game 5, because he felt like he had dialed up the perfect sequence and Altuve just destroys a fastball. Now, just to be clear, Altuve is the one who everyone says was not using the cheating system. So, okay, fine, whatever. No one from the Astros is going to speak about this until they're all paid to do a documentary in 20 years, and even then they probably won't, because the money won't be good enough. But whatever. I think 2017 is the one that is the toughest for Kershaw to take. He did say at one point, I still have PTSD about that series, and I tried to talk to him less about the game, because we kind of know what happened in the game, but more about, I tried to report as much as I could in talking to other members of the team and asking them, did you change your signs? What were the conversations like? And it was something that in the organization, there was a lot of smoke, about, hey, the Astros might be doing something to get signs. And they held meetings, and, Rick Honeycutt and Andrew Friedman both, sort of talked with players about doing this. Alex Wood did it in game 4. Was changing his signs maybe every 8 or 10 pitches. It was something that Kershaw just did not, it's sort of the thing that it was like a failure of imagination. He was like, I don't understand how they're going to get the signs. It doesn't make sense to me. How are they getting the signs if there's no one at second base? And I'm not going to change what I'm doing. And I'm not going to, put my sort of routine, my confidence, my everything at risk in the biggest game of my life on sort of a whim. And it's and there was just no way to prove it. And I think that it's something that, people in the organization were confused about in terms of what the Astros were doing. And, I have in the book that, Chase Utley who was like the most paranoid member of the team. And he was talking to another staffer, who had also been very paranoid. And, he said to him after the series ended, they were talking like thought they might gotten cheated. And Utley said, we'll find out in a couple of years. We'll find out in a couple of years.
Yep.
These guys will leave teams and we'll know what happened. And a couple of years later, Mike Fiers picked up a phone call from Ken Rosenthal.
And then exactly right. And you mentioned the book that Rick Honeycutt pointed out that, in retrospect, of course you're going to change signs, right? And Pratt and Honeycutt were advising him to do that. And he said, okay, if there's a runner on second, I get it. But on first and third, I'm not going to be changing my sides. But you just couldn't fathom cameras every single pitch. And they claim they didn't use the trash can banging in the World Series. There were some whistles. We don't get too deep into that, but it's clear that something was going on. But to me, and also one of the fascinating things you point out too, is the at bat to Bregman. After he got the second strike, Dave Roberts was considering bringing Kenta Maeda into that game.
Yeah. It's something. I wrote about that a little bit when I was at the LA Times, and so I was able to sort of revisit that here. But it was something that, he could see that Kershaw was kind of exhausted. It was the sort of thing that he was going through the order. I think it might have been the third time already. Maybe it was the second, but he was going through the order again and was just really, struggling to get outs. The at-bats were not coming as easy as they had in game one when he had been so dominant. And he was really considering seeing if he could get, Kenta Maeda into the game to try and, finish the at-bat almost. But it was this sort of fleeting thought that he just couldn't act on because it would have caused such a ruckus almost, it would have made it about his relationship with Clayton rather than the team trying to win. And it would have been a real problem, I think, for Clayton to accept giving up the baseball in that spot, understandably. And so Roberts decided not to do it.
Yeah, to me, that's just the ultimate butterfly effect because I think if he cruises, pitches another 7 strong in that one, Jock Peterson had himself a really nice series. But I think he wins that World Series MVP.
Probably,
and then this narrative is put to rest, and then he's just an all-time GOAT. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and I don't think that aspect of it is there were times when he said, how would my life be different if we had just won that World Series, and it's less about like, oh, my legacy would be solidified, but it's more just like, I wouldn't have felt the pain that I felt for all these years.
Yeah.
That pain would have gone away. That would have been nice to like not feel that pain, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us Dodgers fans, like he's the one guy that we're so defensive. I mean, have you seen that meme where it's like the text thing? It's like elongated, like who's the player you would defend like that? And like the longest text ever. That's Clayton Kershaw for us. I always say we're devout Christians. We believe in Christianity. Like he's a religion to Dodgers fans. Why do you think that's the case?
I think because he's never shied away from his responsibility as the kind of pillar of the franchise. I think because he's always taken the ball on short rest. He's always come into games when asked to, pitch in relief, no matter how healthy, his arm or his back or his hip or whatever was going wrong at that time. I think he's never shied away from the responsibility of his failures. He's never made excuses. He's never, he's never suggested that, the team should have done something different in terms of his usage. He's never tried to, abdicate responsibility for what happened. And he comes back every year and, tries to be the best player he can be. And he's still awesome at pitching, And I think there's something admirable about the way he's conducted himself, in across his career in that regard. And I think it's something that stands out not just to fans, but to like his peers, to the players he's played with and the players he's competed against. And that was one of the most rewarding parts of this book, is just getting to talk to like, Paul Goldschmidt, Brandon Belt, Charlie Blackmon, these guys who have competed against him for, a decade and just have like the utmost admiration for him. I think it was Goldschmidt. It's possible it was Blackmon, but they kind of they might have both sort of talked about this, but they described the idea that like he doesn't really have bad games because like even when he's bad, he's in the zone and he's making you compete. He's like challenging you at all times. And there was something that just like they enjoyed about that. They're like, hey, like the best in the world's up there. Like, let's go. And then, yeah, so I think fans sense that, they sense that the way that he has always just shouldered the burden of being as good as he is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for me, it's like, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, he's going down as an all-time great. You point out, of course, his performance in the 2020 postseason, a sub-3 ERA. He was fantastic in the World Series against the Tampa Bay Rays. And it's almost the man in the arena thing, right? The Dodgers have been so good for so long. They've been in so many big series. If he's like Mike Trout in Anaheim and he's just this great regular season pitcher, no one's holding that against him. But I know you got to go. I know you're a busy guy, but
Thank you so much.
Question,
yeah,
what do you think his legacy ultimately will be, Andy?
I mean, for Dodgers fans, it's sort of this, just the best player in franchise history. And I think for the sport at large, I mean, I think for the people he's played with, and the people he's competed against, Garrett Cole said he's the best left-hander of all time. Madison Bumgarner said he's the best player, best pitcher of all time. And, but I think it was some of the stuff that I talked about, earlier. It's like, this is a person who understood from a very young age that he was going to have a chance to, be the sort of player who teams built, their sort of future around. And he felt he needed to do everything within his power to sort of honor that responsibility. And it's something that he has tried to do for, 15 years or so now.
Walking Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, and you guys definitely have to get this book. This is required reading for all Dodgers fans, all baseball fans. We're going to drop the link down below in the description. Congratulations on your masterpiece book here, Mr. Andy McCullough. Just a great read, and thank you for joining us here at Dodgers Nation.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
All right, thanks, Andy.